Hi, I'm Jennifer, the Inquiring Quilter. Welcome to another episode of Intelligent Quilting, where you learn the whys and the wherefores of each method so you can choose the one that works best for the project you're currently working on. Today's episode is about making half-square triangles using the strip method. Now, there are actually two variations of this, so I'm going to call this strip method number 1. And with this method, you are essentially cutting individual triangles and sewing them together. So in that particular regard, this method is very much like using AccuQuilt, which is my favorite thing to do. The only difference is that I'm manually cutting the triangles here. With my AccuQuilt cutter, I am running them through the cutter and having the die cutter cut the triangles for me, and it's very fast. But I am sewing the individual triangles together. The advantage of this particular method, there's a couple. One is that you can use your scraps because the strips can be as long as you feel you want them. So you can use short strips if you want to and create just smaller pairs of half-square triangles and more scrappiness. Or you could use longer strips and cut out pairs of triangles from those two strips that and cut out a lot of them and make a lot of the same kind. Another difference we'll get to in just a minute, but another advantage is that when you use this method, the triangles will pretty much be the right size. You should still check them afterwards, but they will more or less be the correct size when you finish. So that's a big time saver, isn't it? Let me show you how to do it. Before I do that, let me show you the tools you'll need for this particular method. As always, I recommend starch. In this case, starch alternative. It's called Best Press. I always press my fabrics with that before I cut them, and I find that I get very accurate cut, in this case, cut strips. Also, you can use Best Press in the pressing part later and really flatten your seams and get a beautiful looking half-square triangle. What else will you need? Well, you're going to need a couple of rulers, a ruler that enables you to cut them to the right size. Probably the most common ruler you already have in your toolbox for this is called the Easy Angle ruler, and it's a great ruler. And you can use it for a lot of things, especially this method. I happen to have something called the folded corner clipper, which was designed for another purpose, but you can use it for this. Or you might have the Essential Triangle ruler by Bonnie Hunter. That ruler is awesome and helps you make not only half-square triangles, but quarter-square triangles and a whole lot of other things. So it's a great ruler to have too. I'm going to cut my strips at 2.5 inches wide. The math for this is that you just take your unfinished size, and that's the size of your strip. So unfinished size for 2-inch finished half-square triangles is 2.5. So you take the finished size plus 1/2 inch, and that's the unfinished size, and that's the size I cut my strip. Then I'm going to use masking tape to place and mark my ruler line, and you'll see in a moment when I cut why that helps cut fast. So masking tape or washi tape is a good extra tool to have. Rotary Cutter, of course. Rotating cutting mat is very useful and for trimming up your half-square triangles. In this case, they should end up being the right size, but you should always check them. So we'll do that. Pins are useful for keeping the two triangles together before you sew. Pressing, I like to press with a dry iron with no steam, a wool pressing mat. You're going to need some kind of ruler to measure your half-square triangle units, make sure they're the right size. I recommend a square ruler because you've got a 45-degree line, and that will help you, if you have to do any trimming, it will help you trim them properly. I also have a tailor's clapper, which helps in flattening my seams. So now that you know about all the tools you'll need, let's talk about the method. I have cut a couple of strips. These are just from my scraps. So I'm not going to get a lot of triangles out of this, but I could get enough and then cut more strips out of other fabrics and get a very scrappy quilt. I happen to like scrappy, so that's my thing. As I said earlier, I took my masking tape, but you can use washi tape, and put it right on the 2.5 inch line on my folded corner clipper. And what that's going to do is I put it on the top and the bottom. And that's going to give me a ledge to butt up against this strip so I can more easily align my ruler. So I'm going to line the edge. It happens to be straight here. If it wasn't, I could trim that so it is straight. And then I'm going to cut along the edge here and flip my ruler over. Again, butting it up against this top edge and lining it up against this diagonal. And then I'm going to cut straight here. And then I could flip it if I had enough room. I don't know if I do, but let's see. I might just make it. You don't know. I don't know where I'm horrible at accents. I have no idea where that came from. And looks like I just have enough to cut a third set there. Notice with these pairs of fabrics that one edge is blunt. That means you won't have any dog ears on that side. And then the other edge is pointed, so you will have a dog ear on one side of your resulting half square triangle. It's notable that with the AccuQuilt die, it results in two blunt edges, so you don't have any dog ears to deal with at all. But it's just a minor thing. Now that I've got my 3 sets, I think I'll pin them and take them over to the sewing machine and sew them together, and I'll show you how to do that as soon as I get these pinned. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to sew them up. Hi, we're at the sewing machine now, and as always, I like to press my seams open, so I'm going to reduce my stitch length. I've already done that, and I'm ready to sew. So I've started on a leader here. That's a scrap of fabric that will help my machine even its thread tension before it starts sewing on my actual quilting fabrics. You go ahead and I would sew with this blunt end into the machine because it will give your sewing machine feed dogs something to grab onto, and again will give you a better stitch, just like the leader does. So you can chain piece these if you wish. Just feeding them in one after the other. Apart and cut off my leader. So I've got my triangles sewn and I'm ready to press them. Let's go do that. Back from the sewing machine, I've got my 3 triangles here, and let's press and then measure to see if we need to trim. At the very least, we're going to need to trim off that 1 extra dog ear. So to press my half square triangles, the first thing I'm going to do is set the seam. And to do that means simply to put your hot iron on the seam itself for a few seconds. And what that does is that embeds the threads into that fabric, strengthens the seam, and also kind of stabilizes the seam a bit so it won't stretch as easily. I use a hot dry iron, no steam, because I don't want to excite any kind of bias that I might be dealing with. I don't want to stretch the bias out of alignment. And if I do need steam or water or whatever, I spray it. That's what I do. And then I'm pressing on top of a wool pressing mat. I like that because it radiates the heat back up on the other side. So you're pressing on one side, iron radiates heat down, and then it's radiating back up from the wool pressing mat, and it really gets you a nice flat seam. So I've set my seam. Now it's time to press them open. Well, or press to the dark. So let's show you pressing to the dark. I use my thumbnail to just kind of very gently finger press that over. Then I'm going to use the nose of my iron to nudge that seam over towards the dark, and then I very gently bring my iron flat onto the seam, leave it there for a little bit so that the seam can get nice and pressed. Then I'm going to take my tailor's clapper and put that on the seam. The clapper is wood and it's heavy, so that presses down the seam, and also it helps radiate the heat back down. So it's really kind of double baking that seam and making it nice and flat. I will repeat the process for the other side. And I put my clapper back on. And now I have a very nice flat half square triangle. Let's see what size it is. You just need a square ruler for this that's bigger than the unit you're trying to trim to. Again, I recommend a square ruler because it has a 45-degree line, and you'll see why. I want to put my 45-degree line on this diagonal here. And it is my assumption that this is going to be correctly sized, so I'm putting my 2.5 inch there and 2.5 inch here. And I have my dog ear to trim, so I'll do that. And I'll go ahead and trim this side here, except I don't think there's anything really to trim. It is literally the right size. So there's our first one, all pressed and trimmed. Let me show you what to do if you want to press your seams open like I do. Same process, you just finger press very gently. Press that open. Then you use the nose of your iron to really press that. The nose helps open that seam, and then the clapper helps flatten it. Again, I'm going to press from the other side. Make sure I got a nice flat half square triangle unit. Use my clapper to flatten that seam as it's cooling. And let's check it for size. Again, I'm putting my 2.5 inch here, 2.5 inch there, and the 45-degree there. Looks like there's maybe just a little bit worth trimming. So I trim off that dog ear and a little bit of this side here. Probably got stretched just a bit, so there you go, another half square triangle. Finally, let me show you how I use my particular tailor's clapper to press seams open. As you may have noticed, it's got wool on top, and that enables me to press on it. And also it's rounded, so that helps spread open the seam. So again, I start to finger press, put the nose of my iron in there, and just look at that. Look how it just gently opens that seam. And then you leave the iron on it for just a second as it's pressing open the seam. Then I take my tailor's clapper and put it right back down. And again, it's pressing down on the seam and also keeping that heat in and spreading those fibers. Then I'll press from the top this time instead of the back. And one more time I'll let it cool with the tailor's clapper. And then we'll come over here and we'll measure it and see how we did. So again, I've got those dog ears I have to trim off. But let's see how big the half square triangle turned out to be. I will put my 45-degree line here, my 2.5 inch lines there. And it looks like all I have to do is trim off the dog ears. So a really great method if you don't like having to really do a lot of work trimming your half square triangles, and you can make them scrappy because you can make your strips as long as you want. And in this case, I just used a very short set of strips from my stash and ended up with 3 half square triangles in just a tiny bit. So I hope you enjoy strip method number 1. I'll be showing you strip method number 2 soon. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps other people find it. And also, if you like my method of instruction, please subscribe to my channel. That helps me, but also helps other people find my videos. So find the subscribe button and click it, and then you'll be notified the next time that I upload a video. Until then, I'll see you out on the internet. Bye!